Breaking news in the mystery disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The Pima County Sheriff's Office has just confirmed shocking new information about the ransom notes that have haunted this case. For the first time, we're seeing the actual ransom notes from law enforcement, plus a chilling development that police seem to believe this was no spur-of-the-moment crime. The suspect may have stalked the home, studied the scene, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. This is a breaking news edition of On the Case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. A big update coming in from the Pima County Sheriff in Arizona related to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. We are seeing for the first time from law enforcement the two ransom notes that were sent to media outlets at the beginning of all of this when Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in the middle of the night, and also the sheriff raising some questions about when the videos were taken of that mysterious figure on Nancy Guthrie's front steps. And there is a possibility that those videos, according to the sheriff, were taken on different nights. There's a lot to break down. This is really the first time in a while we have received information directly from the Pima County Sheriff. Joining me now to help talk about all of this, Angenette Levy, host of Crime Fix here on Law&Crime. Angenette, thanks for doing this. I know you've been following this case as well. Before we get into the ransom notes, what do you make of the timing of all of this to release this information today? There was the report that came out that some DNA of a hair fiber didn't really turn anything up. Right. And then a couple hours later, you have this pretty large press release coming in about the ransom notes and then also information potentially about the person at the front steps.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I think the timing is intentional. I think that this could mean a couple of things. It could mean that they really are at their wits' end and they have no choice or feel they have no choice but to release this information, hoping that somebody will see these notes and possibly maybe recognize the writing, or possibly this is intentional because they're trying to see how a potential suspect might react. And so there are a couple of possibilities here. The fact that they're saying that nothing came of the DNA on the hair, very interesting to me, very interesting, because it sounded like they were hanging their hopes on that DNA testing that was going on with that hair, the rootless hair. And it sounds like nothing came of it. So I think that they are going to talk only when they feel like it's beneficial to the investigation, because Sheriff Nanos has only spoken a few times to certain local media outlets. He hasn't really done a lot of big national media interviews recently. So there could be a couple of reasons why they decided to release this material at this time.
Yeah, and I think about Sheriff Nanos in the wake of Savannah Guthrie. She released, that video earlier this week, yep, which was really the first one in a while, kind of that selfie style that we saw early on in the investigation, asking whoever took her mom to do the right thing. And then he responded saying that they still had a lot of DNA to go through. And it doesn't appear to this point that turned anything up. Let's get to, so we have these two ransom notes that we are now reading directly from the sheriff's office. The second one, I don't think we've actually seen for ourselves yet. So I'm going to read that here in a second, but we'll start with the first one. So bear with me as I read through this, and we'll put this up on the screen. Hello, Savannah. We have your mother, Nancy. She is safe but scared. She will be held for ransom, and once payment is received, she will be released unharmed. We will be holding her for a maximum of 7 days. You will need to send Bitcoin in the amount of 4 million USD before 5 p.m. on Thursday the 5th. If payment is not received, the ransom will be increased to 6 million USD, which will need to be paid by 5 p.m. on Monday the 9th. Once payment is received to the Bitcoin address below, she will be released within 12 hours of deposit to a safe drop-off location back in Tucson. If payment is not received by the last deadline on Monday the 9th at 5 p.m., she will be killed. Your mother is aware of this, and her life is in your hands. It is in the best interest of everyone to have this completed as soon as possible. You will not be able to contact me from here on out. There will be no negotiation. Do not play games. Law enforcement will not be able to help you. And then at the bottom, it's written as, she had a white smartwatch on the floor of her bed and white floodlight in the backyard was destroyed. And there had been some reporting along the ways with this note about the smartwatch we heard early on and talk of the floodlight. I mean, just first off, it's just a chilling thing to read when you go through this. And there's been kind of a back and forth with anonymous reporting. Reuters had a story that these ransom notes may not have any validity whatsoever. I think the fact that you're actually seeing this from the Pima County Sheriff and they're putting it out to the public, I don't know if it confirms it. They're not confirming it, but it seems like the notes may actually have some validity to them.
Yeah, they may have some validity. I've always wondered if these notes were a cover to buy time to cover up a homicide. I don't know that, but it's always been a thought of mine. Obviously, they're releasing these right now for a reason. They didn't do it before then, or before this time, rather. The 6-month anniversary of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is here. It's upon us. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are some interesting things in this note, how they're saying, don't call the cops. They're not going to help. They cannot help you. They are very adamant and certain of this. The cops had already been called. The cops had already been called by the time these notes were sent. These were sent to local TV stations and to TMZ. The cops were already aware.
Right.
That's how the cops got these notes. So I find that to be very curious. And that's why it makes me wonder, are these simply a cover and a reason and in a way or an attempt to buy time to cover up a murder? That is a thought of mine. What I also find interesting about this, we have a misspelling. I'm going to point that out. Received is spelled incorrectly in this note. And, do not play games. Law enforcement won't be able to help you. But they do offer those details, those 2 details to say, look, we're serious. Go look at the floodlight. We know where we left the watch, etc. So I think there's some interesting stuff here. And I find it also interesting that Savannah Guthrie is off of work right now for the Today Show. She's out in, supposedly on the West Coast filming the Wordle show, right? The new game show. So she hasn't been on the Today Show for the last week or so. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Don't call the cops, but we're going to send this to the local TV station. And so the cops had already been called. So right. There are a lot of questions that arise in my mind from this.
Yeah. And I remember at the time that this came in, I mean, this was already like the headline. I mean, everybody remembers back at the beginning of the year as like this was developing. Like, I mean, this was the story of the year, and it may be actually at the end by the end of the year. That first one that stood out to me too, before we read that second one, USD, because I just think like nobody says USD if you're in the United States. You would just say, 10 million, $6 million, and the border you can cross into Nogales, which is just like an hour south of Tucson. I've actually crossed that border, and it just stood out to me like how easy it is to get across too. The border may open, I think, at like 6 a.m., but like they're not checking papers on the way across. You just wonder like if they were able to get over the border, just how easy it would be to, it's not like coming back where they actually go through your passport and everything. Let me read through this second note. And it starts very differently. And the tone of this is noticeably different from that first one. It's much shorter as well. Guthrie family, we did not fully grasp the seriousness of her physical condition. We never intended to hurt her. That was not our intention. She perished shortly after she was taken. We believe it was heart-related. She is buried in nature now. Nothing you could have done could have changed the outcome. We want your family to know this and hope you all can find peace. We are truly sorry. Right off the bat, I mean, just even addressing the Guthrie family, where the first note was Savannah, and now it's the entire family. And we know that she had like heart issues, and that was a concern. She had health problems, but very different tone in the way of this, saying that they didn't want to hurt her when that is so different from what they said, if this is the same writer in that first letter.
Yeah, it's a very different tone. And I don't know many, I don't think I've ever seen a kidnapping case, and we don't see that many kidnapping for ransom cases. They seem pretty rare, where somebody would say, oh, we didn't mean to do this. We didn't mean to hurt her. Well, you've already threatened to kill her in the first note. You already said you would do that if you didn't get the Bitcoin. And so it's a much different tone, saying she's buried with nature. I mean, I don't, that's not how people talk. I've
No.
said this before. Nobody talks that way. I mean, it's got a different tone to it. So it makes you wonder, was somebody using Chat GPT to write these, AI or something? But, we are truly sorry. And there's nothing you could have done. Well, you said before she'd be fine if he paid the money, the millions of dollars in
Right.
ransom in Bitcoin. So I find this to be very curious, and it makes no sense to me at all. These are two different styles, two different tones. And was this to try to make somebody in the family, the entire family, feel better because they hadn't paid that money? And you're trying to put somebody at ease. Why? I think
Right.
that's what kind of hardcore kidnapper does that?
No, and it's, and I should have pointed this out before. So the first letter was February 2nd, and the second letter came on February 6th. So you have a 4-day difference. And then it's just the motive of you're speaking directly to the Guthrie family, yet you're sending it to KOLD television and TMZ. Right. It's just a very bizarre collection of media outlets to send it to, especially if you're trying to now like comfort a family, but then still put it out in the public like that. If this is all real, and police aren't confirming it, they're saying it's May. I think the fact that they're putting it out to the public, they do write this in the press release. This is from the sheriff. They say, these communications reveal distinctive patterns of word choice, syntax, and phraseology that reflect the writer's unique linguistic style. Mm-hmm. They also provide valuable insight into the person's mindset, motives, and evolution of their tone over time. So, they're putting it out there to see if somebody, and I think the call to the public will definitely be more so in the video part we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, it's just a weird way to talk. And then also they say back in Tucson, which is another part of it, which like my mind just went to Mexico initially, but then I remember that was asked of the sheriff early on, and he kind of, not that he brushed it off on purpose, but the way law enforcement talked about it in news conferences was, well, we're in touch with our counterparts in Mexico, but it never seemed like there was a ton of resources, at least visibly, on the other side of the border looking for Nancy Guthrie.
It didn't appear that way. But the whole back in Tucson part of it, I mean, that could be Mexico. It could be another city in Arizona. We simply don't know. But I think the USD part of this is a very big clue. That is not the way that Americans write and talk about currency. Nobody talks like that. So it could be somebody in Mexico. Again, these could be fake, but it could be somebody in Mexico, and the tones are very different. So they're hoping that somebody who knows something sees these notes and says, I know somebody who talks like that. This looks familiar. So I think that this could be them really trying to cast their line and see if anybody bites on this.
And the other part of this press release that's making headlines right now are the videos and the images initially released by Kash Patel, the FBI director, of that person in a mask, seemingly armed, on Nancy Guthrie's front steps. And people may remember that this was video they said had to be extracted from, because Ring, if you don't pay for a particular service, it doesn't get saved to the cloud. It had to be extracted. So there wasn't a lot of information surrounding like when this video was taken. We know from times of when it was, turned off, but in terms of when that video and this person was actually on her front steps, like that wasn't clear. But now they're saying, quote, 2 videos recovered from Nancy's doorbell camera may be from 2 separate days. These videos are critical to our understanding of the unidentified male's behaviors and choices. They indicate he took steps to prepare for the event on the night of January 31st to February 1st, which is so chilling to think about this not being, because there was that theory out there of maybe they just hit a house, it was a burglary, and they didn't know that Nancy was going to be there. If this actually happened on 2 separate nights where they get this video, it shows that maybe there was more planning than some people thought when it came to targeting, and we don't know particularly the motive yet, but certainly targeting someone with a daughter who's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of planning that actually went into this. That's my feeling. Just the fact that you would go there prior to the crime to case the place and see what you're going to be up against. I find that to be really interesting. And, there had been some reporting, as you said earlier, sourced reporting earlier in this case, talking about how the fact that there were people involved in the investigation that believed these notes were sent on, or that the videos rather were from different dates. So I think it's chilling, of course, as you say. The person, porch guy, that we've seen already on the videos, and we see that up close picture of him, the video, and the mustache through the mask. That's a cold operator, as far as I'm concerned. It does not seem frazzled at all. The plants, reaching for the plants is obviously a very strange part of this, and makes no sense to me. But, it screams to me premeditation and pre-planning. And so I don't think this was just happenstance. And again, it could be covering up for a murder. We just don't know yet. There's so much we don't know. There's a lot of information they have put out, but obviously there's so much information that we still don't have in this case.
Well, and we also don't know what has been the direct line of communication to the Guthrie family through this. We don't know if whoever sent these notes, if these are actually legit, have they had a separate line of communication with the Guthries all along? And that's why Savannah, I'm not saying it, but like, that's why maybe a video came out this week. We don't know why she chose that particular moment to put out that video with a call out to this person once again this week. Police, though, deputies, Pima County, they did release another thing and hoping that people will revisit that video, knowing it might be from a couple separate nights. And this is kind of a, hey, somebody out there has to know something, which that certainly isn't breaking news. But they listed an interesting collection of ways, and this may be just the general way you put it out when you're looking for someone who may have been involved in a crime, but for the public to think about people, especially if you live in the Arizona, Tucson, Pima County, wherever it may be, and you see a change in the way that somebody acts, that could be a red flag, that maybe they had something to do with this. So I'm just going to read these off. They say a change in mood or displays of anxiety, nervousness, or irritability, a change of physical appearance, hair color or cut, growth or removal of facial hair, etc., unexplained injuries, cuts on hands, bruises, etc. During the period Nancy was last seen, normal routine changes like missing work, classes, appointments, sudden departures from the area around the time of her disappearance, vehicle cleaning or repairs, unexplained interest or disinterest in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, noticeable intense interest or disinterest in the investigation, or an unexplained knowledge of the situation, which you read that and there's a lot of it is kind of like, we've seen that in stories before of like what people should be looking for. I just wonder, realizing right now, as I say, it's like, this is 6 months since she went missing. Like where was this maybe back 6 months ago? Like, why now making this call out to the public? Because they put out the videos and then kind of the news conferences stopped. And then now 6 months later, you just worry that they're really in this place where they're just hoping the phone call comes in with the tip that cracks this case.
And that could be their hope. I mean, this could be a sign of desperation. It really could. The 6 month anniversary is here. They know there will be media coverage. It's been 6 months, and maybe they just don't have any strong leads. So they just say, we're just going to drop it out there and see what happens, because we need to solve this. I do think the video from Savannah was very interesting the other day. Chris, you brought that up. The fact that she seems to be talking to one person, she's directing this at somebody. And so, I don't know about you, but I've always thought there was more than one person involved in this. And so that may be why these notes sound so different, as if they are in fact legitimate and authentic. And so I think that she is speaking to one person who she may think actually has some empathy and some heart, while the first person who may have written this first note does not. And so she's hoping that person will just, their conscience will get to them. And she's saying it's never too late to do the right thing. And she's hoping that person calls in. And she obviously sees that this person, if this is this person who wrote this note, has a soul and has right. and care, may care about Savannah at some level. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but that's how I read this.
Absolutely. And you think too, like, everyone has a network. everybody, even if it's just their parents, right? Like, and everyone has a network, and someone in that network, you would have to hope, has that soul if they know something. And over time, you hope the burden of the guilt and seeing these videos of Savannah, that it actually leads to someone coming forward. We've seen that in cases before. I just keep thinking back to and we have great law enforcement experts. And I just remember in the beginning, when that video came out of Porch Guy, and how many of them, former FBI agents, former, major city law enforcement, would say this guy just looks like an absolute amateur, right? Like, it's the backpack, and he's got this mask that you can still kind of see parts of his face. And it's it does look like a guy where if you were to AI, hey, what does a burglar look like? I mean, that's the Halloween costume. And yet you've had everybody from Donald Trump pushing this, Kash Patel, the resources of the FBI, all these different agencies seemingly putting a ton of effort into trying to find it. And it just blows my mind that here we are 6 months later, and it just seems on the surface, we're at this point where it's if you see something, say something. And that's how close we are to finding Nancy Guthrie.
Yeah. And that's what it's going to take. The guilt has to be eating away. If the second note is authentic, buried with nature, I'm sorry, there's nothing you could have done. The guilt has to be eating away at somebody. And that's who they're talking about with what you read before. The changes in behavior, anxiety, sudden interest in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, and then it goes away. I mean, the guilt may very well be eating somebody involved in this alive. And that's what they're hoping for. And you're right. Everybody has been involved in this, but I think there may have been some missteps in the very beginning. Sheriff Nanos said they called the FBI, but Kash Patel, there's been a war of words between the two. He says they weren't brought in until 4 days later, and that their precious time was lost. It's amazing to me that maybe there hasn't been more progress made toward an arrest, but also, Chris, we just don't know. Right. We don't know if they've got their eyes on a couple of people, or if they're simply just desperate at this point in time.
Right. And it certainly give a benefit to the doubt as they're continuing to work. You have this sheriff, Chris Nanos in Pima County. He's been at the end of a lot of criticism. Yes. There's been a lot of reporting about potential tension between the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office, and questions about whether they're step by step. I know there's a task force. Just what do you make at this point? Because you look at this and you wonder, is the FBI, they're the ones who are really kind of handling the video part of it and trying to track down where this Bitcoin wallet's located. How involved is the Pima County Sheriff actually when it comes to some of the digital forensics in this case, the digital evidence of the ransom note and where that may have come from, where these videos came from in the days. Just what do you take of it being the sheriff's office being the one putting this information out today?
Well, they're the lead agency. The FBI is in a support position. The FBI has all of the expertise when it comes to the electronics and the resources to analyze all of those items, and the cell phone triangulation data and pinging towers, and the CAS team with the FBI. They have all of those resources, but the Pima County Sheriff is still the lead on this case. And so the FBI is simply assisting and offering resources. The task force, I was told personally that, the initial detective who was in charge of this has been replaced with a more seasoned investigator. That was a misstep in the beginning, and that they are working together. At least those task force members are working together collaboratively on trying to solve this. So while the FBI brings a lot of resources to the table and likely is analyzing all of this video and things of that nature, I mean, those things take time. It takes time. So the Pima County Sheriff is going to be, until there's a federal nexus with this case, the feds aren't going to take over and be the lead. The sheriff's office is still in the lead, and they are the ones still, the head of this investigation until we learn that maybe federal charges are going to be filed, because at this point, there's been no nexus to show that the FBI should be leading this investigation.
Yeah, we'll see what happens next. Just amazing. 6 months later, the search for Nancy Guthrie continues. Angenette Levy, host of Crime Fix here on Law and Crime. You always do an incredible job. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about this as we continue to both follow this case.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Before we go, I want to put these numbers up on the screen. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Nancy Guthrie, call 1-800-CALL-FBI or 88-CRIME you can remain anonymous. And that will do it for this episode of On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.